get started, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Rohit Dhawan from Amazon Web Services. And Dr. Rohit has been part of the digital transformation scene for over 15 years with some of the biggest players in the sector and guiding young future leaders in this space through his guest lectures at various tertiary institutions. I know that Dr. Rohit has worked for some prominent companies such as IBM, Deloitte Australia and SAS in terms of delivering successful digital programs for Fortune 500 companies, right? Especially in the APAC region. So we decided as a Curious Core, right? We are a school that helps mid-career professionals to transition into the tech industry. And we decided to bring this new Lunch and Learn series called Learning Bytes to all of you because we feel that there are many, many different experts that go beyond the field of UX. And Dr. Rohit is one of them, right? His specialty is in data and data analytics. And today we're going to explore this conversation about turning customer conversations into customer experience from the data lens itself. So this is going to be a very short session. We're going to cover a few things about data and how it's being used in his work, as well as in companies that are looking to transform their digital products and services. So welcome, Dr. Rohit. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you, Taylor, and good to meet you everyone here.
Awesome.
Yeah, indeed a privilege to be in this forum and sharing my experience and insights.
Awesome. So I just wanted to get us started by asking, your perspective on data, right? And how do organizations collect and use data today, especially like for more mature companies? How do you see it? Is it kind of like behind? Is it kind of like still on point in terms of best practices? What's your perspective?
Yeah, no, really good question. So, from what we are seeing in the market, I think overall, there's a lot of untapped potential, right? So, I mean, if you define what good looks like in terms of, companies leveraging data for, driving digital transformation or like fundamentally changing the way they engage with their customers, or even just operating more efficiently, right? Using data and insights, there's a lot to be done, right? I mean, every other organization that I've worked with has tremendous potential. And even some of the big names that you think of, right? You would think that they are highly sophisticated when it comes to the use of data. But really, they're not still fully leveraging, the power of data. And I think one of the reasons why is because a lot of the organizations, that we work with are large organizations, right? Like enterprises. And because of the complexity of people, process, and systems, it becomes difficult for these organizations to create, the cadence or the right chops to make data effective, right? And that's important because like leveraging data for solving a specific business problem is not hard, but when you're talking like a large complex enterprise and you're thinking about leveraging data at scale for multiple use cases across multiple channels, geographies, across thousands and millions of customers, and thousands of internal staff, right, who want to use one of these capabilities, it becomes complex and hard because these organizations face into several issues, right? Like they've got the legacy of tech, they've got legacy of processes. People are not upskilled in terms of how to use data, depending on their role, right? Not everyone's got to be a data scientist, but even as a decision maker, right, you need to understand, you need to have a level of data literacy. So that's what makes it hard. So I mean, the short answer to your question is that the potential is largely unexploited, and more so with larger organizations. The smaller companies, right, like the digital native players, right? Some of these organizations are competing on data. Like for them, data is fundamental, right? So they can do it better because they're lean. They are starting from scratch. Like they don't have the legacy processes and systems. They're young, they're motivated, and they're a lot more adaptable and agile. When it comes to leveraging data. So I think that's kind of like a stark difference between like a smaller, startup, digital native business and a large enterprise. But yeah, I mean, that's one factor that dictates the maturity. And of course, then there's other factors like, which ones of the big enterprises have really thought about data top down, like strategically, who's investing, right? And who's a believer versus who's kind of, more traditional and not maybe, that motivated. Because I mean, then there isn't always a need to transform, right? Some organizations are doing well anyway, right? Data or no data, because their business model is such.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So what I'm hearing you say is that there are different maturities, but largely most organizations have not reached a certain stage of maturity, and data remains largely unexploited for good use. So we know that Amazon is one of the world's most innovative companies, right? And I know you work for one of the business divisions, which is AWS. And I was just wondering, like Amazon, a large company, how do you guys use data, right? Like on in terms of like your decision making, or in terms of like how you deliver better customer experiences?
Yeah. No, that makes sense, right? Because I mean, in my role, right, I'm providing, advice and assistance to other organizations who want to leverage data. But as Amazon ourselves, right, we are also very data driven in whatever we do, right? Like every conversation that we have within Amazon, whether it's, regarding business performance, employee performance, like strategic planning, is driven by data, right? So the way Amazon generally leverages data, and I'm not talking specifically AWS or another part of Amazon, but generally speaking, right, the use of data in Amazon is decentralized, right? So if you want data to make a decision, or if you want data to improve a process or improve customer experience, Amazon has created capabilities, platforms, and mechanisms where you can autonomously access data, the data that you need, build the models that you want, and deploy in field, right, to test, whether it works or not. So it's a decentralized operating model where there's minimum span of control within a central team, right? And that's just not with data. It's actually a team across Amazon, right? It's a very decentralized organization, generally speaking, right? So that independent, autonomous small teams have the power, the liberty to do what they want. I mean, of course, that may create some duplication here and there, which is obviously, the other side of the coin. But that autonomy really facilitates the use of data within the organization. And that's key, right? That's been key for Amazon, right? I mean, so you create these autonomous platforms or capabilities where people can do their own thing. But at the same time, wherever you can automate, you automate, right? So if I look at the the retail business, right, a lot of the data processes are automated. Like it does not require human intervention. Like the entire supply chain, like the fulfillment system, right, in terms of matching demand and supply. When you order something from Amazon.com or .sd or wherever you are, is by and large automated without needing any manual intervention, unless there is an anomaly detected in terms of the regular process, and then someone needs to intervene or interfere.
I really like what you shared, and I think the idea of having a decentralized approach in terms of employees being able to access data. I also know that you have a PhD in machine learning and forecasting, so you are a very, very technical person. So I'm just curious that if someone like myself who's less technical, can I actually like go and get some data that I need to let's say I work for Amazon, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%, right. I mean, I think that's another shift in the industry that we've seen in the last few years, which is democratization of data, as they call it, right? Democratization means that the data is not just in the hands of some very few, talented individuals or someone who's got a PhD on something, right? Anyone can use data and build models very effectively and easily, because 15 years ago we didn't have the tools, right? or the capability for a non-technical person to be able to do that. But today we do. So with the current tool set in the market, it's become very easy for a non-technical person, someone who's not from a machine learning statistics background, to be able to build, these models, right? Only with an interpretation that comes from a business lens. So without a technical interpretation, you can use some of the automated features of these tools, which will build the model for you. So you don't necessarily need to build the model, but all you need to do is interpret the model or understand the fundamentals of how the model is built. And this, we're talking advanced modeling, right? But even at the more simpler level, right? You will have the ability to kind of build a simple dashboard or do some basic trend analysis, and the tools have made it so much easier for anyone to do that, right? So yeah, I mean, you definitely don't need a PhD to analyze data these days. However, you do need a PhD if you're working on very sophisticated products, right, that are driven by data and modeling. I mean, in Amazon, there are hundreds of graduates coming out of American universities and other universities every year, like PhD graduates, right, who go on to work for the likes of Amazon, Google, etc., in their product development teams. Now, I mean, developing new products, right, requires a very sophisticated skill set and a very specialized skill set. But for all intents and purposes, right, if you're working for a regular organization and your main job is not to build a data product, but your main job is to basically focus on your business, right, whether it's telecommunications or whether it's media or whether it's manufacturing, you can focus on your primary role, but leverage some of these latest tools and capabilities to do your own analysis.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm very heartened to hear that I'm not excluded from this evolution in terms of businesses. And I think when we look at smaller companies today, and even some medium enterprises, they have a lot of unstructured data, right? Like data that's not very, very well organized. So I was just wondering, when you approach organizations and you're telling them about AWS, you're telling them about what you guys can deliver and how they can get started in their transformation process. How do you sort of like convince them that like this is worth paying attention to? Like what's like the first couple of things you need to let a CEO or a C-suite know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the big aha moments, right, or I would say epiphanies for a lot of the business people is when they stop seeing data as a technology capability and they start seeing data as a business capability, right, which is going to drive growth. And who wants growth, right? The CEO is interested in growth because he's ultimately responsible for profit and loss, right? The chief marketing officer is responsible for growth. The head of retail banking is responsible for growth.
I think you accidentally mute yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I did. So what I was saying is that any persona or any leader in any organization who's interested in growth cannot afford to ignore data. So, I mean, honestly, it is never a hard sell, right? I mean, we never have to go into a meeting and convince a CEO that that data is important. They already know that because they've heard it from 10 other people. They've seen competition leapfrog, right? Because someone's got it right? And they know that they need to get on top of the game when it comes to leveraging data. So, whether you are associated with a growth objective, right, like increasing market share, or focused on customer and acquisitions, or whether you are more kind of internally focused on supply chain and operations, you will benefit from data regardless, right? So, I think the why question is already answered in the minds of most of the leaders. I think it's the next step, right, which is the what and the how. They know what needs to be done, but not exactly. And they want someone to define the what for them based on what is happening in the industry and what the best practices are versus, other case studies that have been successful. And really, where the rubber hits the road is the how. Like, how do you make this successful? Because, I mean, the reality is that a lot of data projects fail for one reason or the other. So if data is so promising, why is it failing as a project? I think that's the key question.
I think you sort of nailed it by sharing that. And I was just wondering, you've done a lot of data projects in your career, right? Is there like a proudest moment for you where you, I don't know, where you actually influenced or impacted the organization just because of the work you did, either from the lens where you're transforming the practices or, just bringing the data back to the organization with their decision making? I'm just wondering if you have a case study to share.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few actually, but I can give you an example of one, which is kind of, representative of, the work I do as well. And this is a large transformation program, right, for a customer, we have in Singapore. And really, the intent was to, move the dial, right, for the customer, right, in terms of really, getting the business outcomes. But moving the dial would actually mean gearing up for a large change program, right? Because this organization, in its roots, right, did not have the right operating model, the right delivery mechanism, the right ways of working, right, or even the right technology, right, to be successful with data. But what they had was vision and sponsorship, and I think that's kind of a really good starting point, right? Like you have a very senior stakeholder or a very senior leader in the organization who says, yes, we want to do this, and we want to do this right, and we will listen to what you have to say, based on your experience. And that was a really good case study because we started small, by way of delivering something measurable and tangible, but in parallel we started thinking big, right? So we said, okay, let's start small to run an experiment on what can be done. And the theme was, increasing market share, right? So the small experiment resulted in 0 market share increase because it was an experiment, right? It was we knew from the onset that it would fail because we didn't have the right structures, right, to be successful with that project. But what it gave us was some really good data points in terms of understanding where the issues are, where the limitations are, and where the opportunities are. Right. Based on that, we created a think big vision for analytics for this organization. And the think big vision was really to create a capability that would drive market share by 8 to 10% year on year. Right. So that was the think big vision. But at the back of that, we were going to build an integrated data capability. When I say integrated, it means that it's not just data; it's also the underlying technology platform, and it's also the business architecture to go with it. Right. So to make sure that the data is there, but it is leveraged, used, and applied in the most effective way. And you're going to have people doing that, right? So once we experimented, we were then able to define the people, process, technology capabilities that needed to be ramped up for this customer. And over a period of 6 to 8 months, right? I guess we probably got to achieving 30% of the vision we had set out, right? I mean, that was exciting enough for me, right? Because based off that 30%, we were able to make approximately 5 or 6% a contribution to market share, like immediate results, right? Which is not too bad at all, given we started from a very, very low base. So for me, what excites me is transformation, right, within organizations. I mean, I could say that what excites me is building a very sophisticated data science model, but that's not what excites me anymore. It used to excite me once upon a time. But I think I can we can create more impact, right, by enabling others versus being an individual kind of contributor.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Rohit. And what some of the keywords I'm hearing is like have a vision, have executive sponsorship, and kind of know what kind of outcomes that you want to define if you're part of the organization. And that's something you can, if we are working in an organization today, you can bring it to the management. And then from there, as I hear you say, it's about handling the people, right, including capabilities, the tools, including the technology side, and the process, which is like how you bring things together, how people should treat data, and how is the data being modeled across the organization. So I think those are very important things in the transformation process. I'm curious to know though, like when you're working with leaders, how do you get people to come along, right? Because a lot of our listeners over here today, they work in more of the tech focused departments, right? And to the rest of their colleagues, maybe like UX or maybe like data is like a very odd thing. Like, I didn't learn that in school. So if you're a leader today, how can you get people to come along in a journey and get them to understand like, hey, we need to start learning about this?
Yeah, it's actually more simple than you think, right? It's pretty simple. You get people across a table, right, and get them to work in a multidisciplinary, cross-functional environment. And that's what does it, right, for a lot of leaders, right? I mean, this is fundamental to how you deliver in an agile sport, right? Like you got to have a mix of skills. It depends on the product you're building. I mean, some products are more data centric, right, where data can play a key role or a lead role, but there are other products where data will be still an important component. So I think the key is to get is to think of data as a vertical, right? Where data is as important as all the other kind of disciplines or functions. Whether it's user experience or whether it's technology or whatever else, right? Rather than think of data as a horizontal, like a lower layer of the architecture, right? So when people work across a table and they think about data from multiple perspectives, right? From the perspective of the customer, from the perspective of the product manager, from the perspective of the data scientists, that then the non-data people start coming on board with what this is about. And they don't necessarily need to end up being data experts, but they need to be able to be in a position where they're able to appreciate, where, like when to pick up the phone and call the data person, right? In a way. And that's what we're trying to get to in most organizations, like get non-data people to a level where they are data literate.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when I remember when I was working for Razer, and I was just trying to get my team to look at data a little bit more, and I realized they weren't looking at something at Google Analytics, right? On a weekly basis even. So I actually introduced a tool which was a lot simpler for them to look at data, which is a Hotjar. And then people started looking at it because it's so much simpler to understand what they're seeing, and it's so much easier, as you talk about experimentation, right, earlier. Like they look at the change, they can see the results, and then gradually there's like a little bit more data awareness. But I think you're right to say that there needs to be a little bit of education and training and sort of like sharing with the rest of the organization, like the basics of data, like even statistical thinking, if we talk about that. So I think that's a really good start. I was just wondering, when you're implementing projects, what are some of the common mistakes that you see organizations tripping on when they're trying to transform, when they're trying to get more agile, more more digital, as they go along?
Yeah, no, really, really good question, right? And I'll tell you 3 big ticket items, right, that people trip on. And I actually like to think of these as success criteria. I mean, if you get these right, then you are setting yourself up for success. Number 1 is having or not having a business sponsor for a data project, because often data projects don't have a business sponsor; they only have a technology sponsor, right? Now, if you're doing a pure technology-oriented project, then of course it doesn't make sense to have a business sponsor, right? Because what you're building is a stack or a platform, right, which is pure tech, and it will, in some shape or form, in the future, right, enable the business to do something indirectly or indirectly. But any project which is associated with business outcomes. Now, this may sound obvious, right? If it's a business outcome oriented project, you got to have a business sponsor. But you know what? Most projects don't. they start with the data team, and the head of data and analytics is often the sponsor of data projects. Once the project is designed, right, then they go and present a business case to the business stakeholder saying, look, this is what we have come up with, and will you approve and sponsor this? Big mistake, right? Like, you got to have the business sponsor involved upfront. And
that's the first point. No worries about it. Yeah,
that's the first point. And the second point is, right, having a, and I mentioned this before, right, having a cross-functional team, right? So the data team should never operate in a silo. And even if you're building a pure data product, it's got to be tested with the business outcome, even if it's a pure data product, right? And the third important criteria, right, for being successful with data is not to build anything in isolation. Anything you build has to be able to, you have to be able to scale it, right? So it should not be one-off. And the way you define or design the product initially has to provision for the product to be able to scale in the future, or it's got to be part of something much bigger. Otherwise, it will become a point-in-time solution, and it may not be adaptable, right? So, I mean, you build a really sophisticated model. It solves the problem today, but hey, market landscape changed, customers' expectations changed, a new competitor came in, the model could not evolve, and there you go. We had to throw it away. So I think those are kind of the three, my top three. There's obviously a lot more.
Yeah, those are really good top three, and I wasn't even aware for some of them. And I think as we're kind of nearing the end of the session, I just wanted to ask you, our theme and our topic today is turning customer conversations into customer experience. So I was just wondering, well, what's your point of view on that, turning customer conversations into better customer experience with data? Do you have any final sharings or tips or perspectives?
Yes, I do. In Amazon, we are customer obsessed, which is one of our leadership principles, right? And we have this methodology which we call working backwards. It actually means working backwards from the customer. And you've got to answer, 5 customer questions, that we have, using our mechanism, right? Question number 1: who is the customer, right? Like, you bring them to life, you define who they are, right? Like, name them. Even if you have 1 million customers, think about one. And then you think about, what's the customer challenge or opportunity, right? Which is about, thinking about the customer touch points. How do they interact with you today? What opportunities or challenges do you see even beyond your interaction with them in their lives in terms of what they do, right? And then you think about ideas to address those challenges and opportunities. And then you think about, okay, how do we measure success, when we think about implementing these ideas? And finally, you think about the customer experience, right? So I've gone from who's the customer, what's their challenge or opportunity, how am I going to solve that problem, how am I going to measure success? And if I implement these ideas, what does the new customer experience look like? That's it, full stop. I think that gives you enough of a design to start progressing with, injecting data into the equation, right?
Okay. And I have one last question for you. As someone who's maybe non-technical and I'm trying to learn more about data, do you have like books or do you have any courses that you think you could recommend that I get started just so I'm more data literate? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's heaps of resources available on the internet. I mean, if you're interested in cloud technology, which is kind of where the future is, even for data, because everyone's building on cloud. AWS, of course, is a great place to start. It's technical, definitely. It's not business oriented, but I think to get started with, right, the technical foundation, is actually important. Even though ultimately you will apply everything through a business lens. So I think it's a question of getting trained on the technical part, but keeping your business hat on, and constantly thinking about, okay, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me? How do I apply it in my own situation? Because there's very few courses available out there which take a business lens to data. I think there's some executive courses from MIT, etc., which are really super expensive. But it's really experience, that will teach you the application part. But to get started, I mean, yeah, AWS is a great place, right? Like training and certification. I mean, there's actually a certification for being a AWS certified, data and analytics practitioner. And of course, I mean, there's other avenues, right? Like Coursera, other kind of, training resources. There's heaps available out there.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rohit Dhawan. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. Once again, let's give sort of like a round of virtual applause for Dr. Rohit, who's the APJC regional lead for analytics strategy at AWS. And we're interested in having a business view and that is somewhat technical on data. It looks like AWS do have some free courses available for people. And with that, I think we'll share a little bit more in terms of our polls. And was just wondering if there's any questions or from anyone. If not, I'll be sharing like a quick poll in this case from the team. Okay, so just to briefly speak about, maybe I can have my colleague Lugas over here to just briefly speak about this, and then Dr. Rohit, thank you for your time. I'll just put you back into the audience. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Rohit, for joining us today and sharing your insightful feedback. Insightful session, and all the various things you spoke about data, which I think even for the marketing team, that's something that we can also try to start seeing what we can mine and make the best use out of the customer feedback that we get. So for everyone, thank you also for your time to attend this virtual lunch and learn. Just a few things that we wanted to share about Curious Score is that, how Curious Score can actually help your team is that for the business partners, we actually do career conversion programs, and we also provide UX and CX courses, and we also do design thinking and product management courses. And should you want customized masterclasses that, based on your team's strengths and talent, we actually also provide those. And on an ad hoc basis, we also do group and individual coaching. So that's that's about us. So you can always follow us on our LinkedIn channel. All these videos will actually be available on our YouTube, so you can subscribe to us. And the next thing we actually wanted to ask you guys is, the poll question that Dalen will be sharing with you shortly. We just wanted to gather your feedback because, as this is our second session, we want to explore more about what themes and topics that all of you attendees would like to hear next. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.